5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So yeah, that as we said, we don't do this thing in isolation. We're part of the community, and poetry can be a form, a means of advocacy and as activism, a
Hmm.
way to be of service also, to inform others. And I'm wondering what has that been something that's also been kind of part of your work, or if there are different how that has kind of shifted, perhaps how it shifted your voice, or as well as your relationship to maybe even like the authors that you maybe once admired, and then it's like, well, wait a second, this is a great poet, but as a person, hmm,
Mm.
and kind of how does that work? Because that's something that's not talked about too much, or maybe it is, but maybe it's something to be talked about more and discussed.
Sure. Poetry as activism. As a Black woman, my very existence is kind of political. So as a result, I think my poetry often gets very political, and definitely has a space when it comes to poetry as activism. I find myself writing a lot in response to kind of the current moment more than I probably ever have. Especially now, I just think there's so much to be kind of angry about. And naturally, writing is an arena to kind of work through some of that. So, but it's not just about anger, it's also just about being a person, also just about like my humanity. I think part of my writing and part of writing as a Black woman is an assertion that I am worthy of everything that this country essentially tries to keep from me. Um, it is, an assertion that I am human, that I am capable of anything and everything. And so a lot of my work has been, on one end of the spectrum, there are the angry poems, such as, the poem about, my Twitter feed when the protests were kind of ramping up, and I wrote a poem about what it was like being on Twitter and seeing pictures and of everything that was going on. But then on the other hand, to just write poems about falling in love is also kind of, unfortunately it is, but also I think is a sort of radical act too.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's interesting. How would you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think when I think about my own education, or when I think about the poetry that I was introduced to kind of throughout my whole academic career, I can probably count on one hand the amount of poets that I was introduced to that looked like me. And I think that has a lot to do with
Wow.
that process of finding my voice, because it's like, how do you write, and how do you do this thing when you haven't really seen that people that look like you can do this thing, right? When you imagine poetry, or when I came to the page and imagined what poetry was like, my imagination is, I have all of these white writers in my mind. And so when I'm thinking of what's possible in a poem, I'm not imagining that, I can be the speaker. I'm not imagining that I can be the subject, because that's not what I've seen. That's not what I've read. So I think a lot of it just has to do with that education, and to finally get that permission to be on the page, to be the speaker or the center of my work. And I think once I got that permission, um, it was very liberating. But I also, think about all of the other Black kids that are going through school and reading
Right.
people and not
And
reading
and
people who
that's
look like them.
and that's the thing, is that no one's going to 100%. You have to take the permission
Mm,
to do the research yourself for that, and realize to do that, because you're not going to see, for example, as a neurodiverse individual with autism and a recovering addict, and I have, work about that of certain things. It's like, can you do this of stuff? You have to like take the permit. I'm going to do this. And that's the thing, is a lot of the times that, and that's what I'm thinking of in terms of in academia, is there, I didn't have poetry from an academic background, though some of my works might be considered in ways academic. Okay, are you, is it still ever more important to also, like, if you're not being shown this thing, let me ask and let me do so, because you know what? Because sometimes what's more important is going your own way and finding those. And is that something that you feel maybe needs more of ability to be like, hey, I'm looking for this, that, this is, I don't see this. Where are more the individuals of color that such that I can't just count on my hands of the stuff that I want to learn, and I want to learn of those that way back in the history books or whatnot, of certain things that were just glossed over. And does there need to be more representation of that? And how can that be? How might there even be a conversation or something to start to bring that up of different periods of time, so that we don't just look at the traditional white male lens leading up, and then you have more maybe in the contemporary in certain periods, but going back way back in even in the romantic periods or different periods. Can we find this? How can we find this? And what can be done to shift the attention to those that are buried in books?
That's such a difficult question, because I think it requires a complete kind of reimagining of the education system as a whole, because it's not just in my English classes that I'm experiencing this. It's our history books, right? It's everything that we're taught, because we are a country that prides itself on being this kind of white patriotism. So that's what we're going to teach, because that's what we're proud of.
Like in mathematics, you have if you get into some super high level of mathematics, and then you learn about no other and certain, and there's certain other individuals, I'm not sure who it is, that you'll get into, like, of some amazing, incredible female mathematicians and certain things, but you don't really get to you don't have that until way later of contemporary stuff. And they are there in history in different places, but they're glossed over because maybe it's like, I don't want to do the work as it, and we stick to the traditional norms and customs.
Absolutely. It's about challenging the entire status quo, essentially, right? The canon of literature, the canon of mathematics, as you stated, the canon of history books, even there's just, it will require an entire reimagining, I think.
Yeah, and what's great is that through poetry and different media and mediums, that we can maybe we could start to go about that, and that's and perhaps permission is not granted. It needs to be taken.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea of permission is not granted. Yeah, I think that was very much my experience when I finally came around to realizing that I could write about what I wanted to write about. I read The Small Blades Hurt by Erica Dawson. And Erica Dawson, she's a formalist, but she's also just really, really amazing at incorporating like everyday dialogue and slang and just people in things that sounded like me, that sounded like my family, into a space that could still be formal. And that completely changed my life, completely changed my writing, my everything, essentially. And I took that permission to write about what was important to me, to write about being Black, to write about what it was like being Black in Alabama, to write about Chicago, to write about my family. I 100% had that moment when I read that book.
And did you do you have a piece of one of your first pieces that are like, aha, I can write about this? Do you have a piece that you think
Yes.
like, takes that moment very well and describes that, or maybe not describes that, but embodies
Absolutely.
that you would allow us and grace us with the presence to be beautified by it, either visually and auditorily, blah, or just audio. Yeah. Would you read it, the poem, please?
Yes. So this poem came very soon after I read that book, and was one of my first attempts to just write about something write about my own experience. And so I wrote about getting my hair done as a Black girl and what that was like. And so this poem is called Tenderheaded. I resume my Saturday night post between stretch marks, shoulders caught between chestnut thighs as Grandma greases my scalp. She carmines the nape of my neck with her rat tail comb, the one with gaps where my naps wrestled in one. The coffee table muddles with jars of gel and rubber bands that welted her thumbs when they snapped. My backside numb on the living room carpet, dahlia fibers honeycombing my skin through my oversized tee. Be still now, and I strain against her grip on my roots, chawing tongue to check my mules, focusing on the click of her short nails colliding as she plates piece over piece. She hums, for your glory, parts my hair into sections, gridding out old city streets in rows of cotton. I wonder if she braids my hair for the pastor's approval or God's. They'd never say.
Ooh. Again, snap, 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 clap, 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 round of applause. That's going to be my new thing that I do. It's going to bug people. I really love those last lines about and talking about for the pastor's approval. And there's this I also see a trend that these two pieces might go together, be part of this collection of which you speak.
Yes.
Yeah. Pretty sneaky.
I
Yeah.
know. Don't reveal all of my secrets.
No, I find that sometimes it's probably something not to be done, but I'll write, and Joshua Corwin has a with blah 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 as a collaborative book, and we are currently seeking publication. I'll just put that at the end of my bio. It's probably not good to do, but I did that there for my or something for my first book for stuff, and then it got picked up. So maybe it works. Maybe it works. You're allowed to do that. Why not? Why not?
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, but it seeking approval, and then there's also I think that also gets back for the thing of it's your body, your hair. My hair is very dirty. I wear a hat. I think hats are like shoes for your head, and there's this idea of taking permission, of that permission is not granted, it needs to be taken. And that especially if there's something over for that your hair is as to your body. I meant not as to your body, it is akin to your poetry. It is a part of you. It is essential to you. It is not contingent. It is just essential. As a poet, it is part of you. And so and there's also that thing is when you cut away, talking about rewriting and editing, you're cutting away and you're finding different things, but also of it's just, there's a lot going on there that I think is, I hope essays will be written about, or I don't know. No, it's just, what do you see about this connection of what was going on with your mind? You read it a few times. What kind of when you gave it also then space to breathe, what did that poem become for you?
Yeah, this poem kind of, I think this poem is representative of a lot of the themes that I write about. I think this poem is one of the pieces that I have where you see a lot of those intersect. There is, of course, we're thinking about just at a foundational level, Black experience, right? The experience of getting your hair done and what that's like as a Black girl. But then there's also the historical component. We're thinking about, we get to the end and we think about her parting my hair into sections that are like
Yeah,
old
and
city streets or rows of cotton, right? So then we have this um, historical aspect of what hair has meant, how that has played a role in history as a Black woman, right? And then, of course, faith, which has, reemerged in my writing in a different way recently, but I think has always been a really integral part because my grandmother and my grandparents are so religious, and a lot of my family is so religious. But then, kind of my intermediate family unit wasn't as religious. So there was this really interesting dynamic where when I was younger, I was going to church a lot with, my grandparents and my parents. And that was kind of a really important and necessary part of our lives. And then as I got older, that wasn't as important, and we kind of stopped going to church and things of that nature. So I think faith is kind
yeah.
of
It's there's this interesting thing, if I may, in Judaism, there's this thing that also that I hope I'm not botching this, that Yisrael, or Israel or whatnot, that it's also, means it's also a connection of that to wrestling with God, or wrestling with something. But I don't know if it's just with God, but also it's wrestling with your own internal way, your own internal moral compass, your own internal path. And I don't think that you necessarily need religion or organized religion for that. It helps if you're part of that. It depends, because there are different things of what that means and what that indicates. I studied and learned a lot about how there's different. I studied some classes in sociology of secularity and stuff as an undergrad, and you also see different kind of things and how that changes, and as well as in different cultural and certain environments. And it's something. There's a great book about an African American woman writing about in her community is coming out as an atheist. I think it's that or something, and kind of then looking at certain things in certain communities. There's so much great. I can't remember the name. I'll probably remember it, later on after this, and then I'll be like, oh shoot. But that is something that's really interesting to come to mind, because there's this, wait, that can be, and people can write about that, and there's that thing like that needs to be discussed. And then similarly for me, um I had a period where I kind of wasn't so much with my Judaism, and certain things happened, um where I thought somebody was telling me my belief in God was wrong of a certain thing, and then it wasn't. There was this whole thing, but I kind of took that and buried it, and then I eventually later I needed this separation in order to then get back to on my own terms, on my own way of how I look at it, and that's the thing. Rather than being like commanded and told like, no, you need to do this, rather than like, let me find my own path, let me find my own way. I don't know. And that's the thing. Just like, I don't know. I'm trying to tie that back to the notions that you brought about with hair. Um, maybe you see a bit of a connection. I'm just trying to piece that together.
Yeah, I think there is. I think essentially what I am doing in my poems is finding my way back. I think
Oh,
that
I
work
love
is.
that.
I think that
That
work is
would be
happening.
that's a great title for a collection, is Finding My Way Back.
It's so funny because someone recently just read my full length and they were just like, you should just write a book about, you should just write a collection, just faith, just about faith, because that's a lot of what's happening here. And I think that's probably what they're picking up on is, as I kind of go back and look through my work in that collection, I'm realizing that faith is in places that I didn't even realize that it was before. And that it's been creeping into much more of the poems than I originally imagined. And I think it's because a lot of that work of finding my way back to faith and what that looks like is happening in the stuff that I've been writing.
And is it faith? Because when you say this, is it faith on your terms, or is it different? Is it faith? Because that's the thing that, is it reimagined faith?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing, because rather than maybe there's a traditionalist or a certain thing from your, but also it's, you find your own, like, as it applies, as you see it now. And just like when you look at your work from years ago, you don't look at it at the same lens as when you just, as just the day you wrote it, obviously.
Sure.
Yeah, and I don't know, how is your relationship to faith, as well as in terms of practice, and ritual,
Mm-hmm.
been affected? And also, has the pandemic, I guess it has, as you said, but played a role in that, as well as, do you bring that into how you go about your life? I'm curious, like, how you, like, let's say, working on your PhD, or certain things,
Mm-hmm.
how you, or, let's say, it's like this intuitive thing of like, no, I'm going to work on this project now, I think, or no, or even when, as a poetry, a reader for different, or things, for editor for different journals, of, or it's using something that's akin to that, attuned to that. And maybe faith, it's a faith slash intuition.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, just like, what's your process of bringing that into your life, and how does that work?
Yeah. I like faith slash intuition. I think that's pretty spot on.
Yeah,
And I
I'm
think
sure there's a better word for it. I can't come up with
no,
it.
I think that's really pretty accurate. I think there is something about intuition that is really directly linked to faith. Especially as of late, I for me especially, one of the things that I think has kind of catalyzed the process of finding my way back, as we've been saying, is living alone. Um, I did live alone for a certain period of time in Birmingham, but I also had a partner. So, I was also just with my partner all the time, but I've been, by myself. And then of course with the pandemic, that has increased even more this kind of alone time that we've been spending with ourselves. And the world is on fire. Everything
It
around
is.
us
Yeah.
is going up in flames, and so what do you do? Where do you go? Where do you turn to when you're by yourself, kind of in the middle of a fire? and you're uncertain of whether you're going to make it out on the other side. And I think naturally I have turned to faith. I've turned to God. To me now, faith is kind of synonymous with friendship with God. And I think as a child, that was very different. Faith was kind of this really just abstract thing. And, everything was just kind of punitive and negative, right? You're always being punished.
As well as a closed book as well.
Yeah, right. There's only one way to understand things, and it just felt suffocating, I think is probably a good word for it. And now
it brings me back to that line of undressing in the first poem you read. It reminds me of that.
Yeah, and I think now I have a friendship, I think, with God, and I think that has allowed me to be kinder to myself. That has allowed me to be more myself. That has allowed me to feel, I think, more connected, more grounded in my faith. And so I definitely think it's now on my terms, this kind of relationship, or just redefining what that relationship looks like. And I don't know, people might find fault with me describing that relationship as a friendship, but I think that's
right. And it's also
valid.
yours. It's your own. And, just like that's something that you have command over. It's yours. It's yours. And nobody can tell you otherwise. What are the, like, okay, that's nice. You're wrong. That's your opinion. This is, because I'm me and you're not me. So you can't know.
Yeah, and I think it should be individual. I mean, everyone's relationship is different. It will look different, and that's okay. Like, who am I to say that someone else's relationship with faith is problematic or is incorrect? I can't know. I don't know what others are going through and experiencing.
Only what works for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So.
Yeah. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm just gonna pause it for a sec. I desperately need to use the restroom, and then what I want to do is I want to
Cool.
we'll tie it back to doing for the OTSCP. Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah. It's also was lagging slightly, so I just noticed that. So I get to use the restroom also. Awesome. Yes. Okay. So I'll call back in about 5 minutes. Okay.
Awesome.
Okay. Awesome.